Hey, everybody, and welcome to season 2 of the All About Everest podcast. And I'm your host, Pauline Reynolds Nuttall. On this podcast, you can get anything and everything about Mount Everest, including interviews, book recommendations, tips, updates, and a whole lot more. So, welcome to the spring 2023 Everest climbing season. And here we go. Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast episode. It is an interview with Skip Horner. You may not be familiar with Skip because he's not in the limelight. He hasn't written books, he hasn't interviewed with tons of media outlets, and he hasn't done any documentaries. However, he has his achievements as a mountaineer. And his greatest achievement was that in 1992, when he finished Mount Everest, he became the first mountain guide to guide clients to all of the 7 summits. Skip is local. He lives right down the road. And it was fun to interview someone that comes from my area. There's one other mountaineer in Montana that I would love to interview. So, Conrad, if you hear this, hit me up. Skip is a delightful person, and he's been guiding. This is his 50th year guiding. That is a really long time. And we talk about the commercialization of the mountains, how and why it started, his expeditions to Mount Everest in 89 and 92, how commercialization has changed, how guiding has changed. And of course, we talk about death, which is a common thing when you talk about Mount Everest because it's a reality. The favorite part of this interview for me is the last 15 minutes because Skip talks about Rob Hall and tells a story about him, but he also calls me out, and rightfully so. And listening back on it, because I've listened to it a couple times, he's right. He's absolutely right. We need to talk about the death and not shy away from it. Not only to remember these people that have died in mountaineering accidents, but also to learn from them, especially this newer generation. I really hope that you guys enjoy this interview. I don't have any housekeeping stuff for you guys today, just the interview, because you guys know I could talk on and on. This interview is a little long, so definitely bear with me, but I hope you enjoy it and let me know what you think. And here we go. As you guys know, I'm a very outdoorsy person, always looking for new gear and to discover new brands. That's why I love my Nomadic subscription box. You can get it as low as $29.99 per month, and they have both monthly and quarterly boxes. This month's box, the theme was Stay Alert. It included 5 items: the Buff Coolnet UV Neckwear Gaiter, the Celestron Up Close G2 Monocular, the Write in the Rain On the Go Notebook, which is waterproof, a Go Macro Bar Mini Blueberry. That was an interesting granola bar, and the Tech New Original Skin Cleanser that you can use on your skin after exposure to poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac. And because you're listening to this podcast, you can get 10% off any order from their website. Use the code Everest at checkout for 10% off. And you can find the link and the code in the description of this podcast. Hi, everybody, and I wanted to welcome Skip Horner to the All About Everest podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Skip.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
And Skip actually lives just down the road from me. I'm surprised I haven't interviewed him before. And he's kind of the old school mountaineering. He was climbing in the late 80s, early 90s before all of these young folks that we've been seeing lately. So, Skip, tell me, what got you into mountaineering?
Well, it was in my soul. I don't know where it came from, but as soon as I graduated from college, I moved directly to Colorado, mostly just to ski. I wanted to be a ski bum. But while I was there, I became enamored with the mountains. And I stayed in Colorado for a number of years and began climbing the following year. Um, Along the same time, I got a job rowing rafting trips in the Grand Canyon. And I did that for several summers. And through that job, I met some people who ran trekking and climbing trips, mostly in the Himalayas, but all over the world, mountain travel. And they hired me to work in Nepal and South America and some other places. And I just began climbing every chance I got. I'd be river running for a few months, and then I'd run off into the mountains somewhere and climb. And because I was guiding in the Grand Canyon and I was ski guiding in Colorado, the mountain guiding, the climbing guiding just became a natural progression for me to follow. Um, so around the late 70s is when I actually began guiding mountains in a big way. So that by the time Everest became accessible to more than just big international expeditions, one per season, um, we began thinking about taking clients up there. Of course, typical mountain guide, we don't have a lot of money, so we'd have a hard time funding our own expedition. So it made sense to come up with appropriate climbers who had the money and had the skills to come with us to go up the mountain. So that's our trip in 1989 could possibly be the first actual commercial expedition to the mountain. We were on the Tibetan side. A friend of mine named Mike Dunn organized trip. Todd Burleson came along as an observer. Todd, of course, started and owns at Alpine Ascents International. Vern Tejas was the other guy beside myself on the trip, and we had about 8 clients who were strong. And this will become an ongoing discussion we'll have today about the clients who go to Everest. But just as an example, back then, Dolly Lefevre was a client on the trip. She was already a successful mountain guide in her own right, went on to become the first American woman to climb the 7 summits. She climbed Everest a few years later. 2 or 3 other members of that trip ultimately went on to climb to the top of Everest. We didn't make it to the top that time. 2 teams made it to the high camp at 8,000 meters, but we both got blown off the ridge. It was late. It was middle of October by that time, and it was too late. But it was a strong team, and we were all proud of our achievement because it was such an unusual effort to have guides and clients on the same trip working together. Another interesting aspect. Let me
go ahead.
Another really interesting aspect of that, which is a one-time thing, which we thought might be the next big thing, turned out to be not. We use liquid oxygen instead of gaseous oxygen. We brought liquid oxygen, which was Mike Dunn's brainchild. We brought 2 big barrels, stainless steel, really insulated barrels of liquid oxygen at minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we had 20-liter containers that we just opened the spigot and liquid oxygen poured into these containers, and we sealed them off. They were also obviously very well insulated, which we carried up the mountain up to the North Col at 23,000 feet. And there we had smaller 5-liter containers where we poured them into. So when it gets warmer than 300 degrees below zero, oxygen boils off and becomes a gas. And we had a system worked out that would transport that boiled off oxygen into a regulator that fed us oxygen just like regular oxygen. It was very expensive, of course, but we figured over time the cost would come down because of the improved technology and the more demand for it. As it turned out, it wasn't all that practical. We did use it one time. One of our members was stuck in a tent with the stove going and became, and carbon monoxide was getting him. So it was at 23,000 feet on the North Col. So we pulled him out of the tent, slapped the mask on him, and sent him down. And it worked fine. He could breathe the oxygen. He could feel the effect of having oxygen. It was well regulated, but we never really got to use it after that. And the idea never caught on, which was kind of a shame because we thought it was such a brilliant concept. And maybe it will in the future again, but never did happen again.
So that trip in 89, it was on the Tibetan side. And I don't think I've heard that the commercialization kind of started to fund your own expeditions, that it was kind of an ends to a mean. Was it that way also for your expedition in 92?
Well, in 92, Todd had gotten Alpine Ascents up and running. It was a pretty strong company even then. He had made one attempt on Everest the year before, and I think Pete Athens summited that time. But our trip in 92, May of 92, was a very strong team. It was Todd and Pete and Vern and me, 4 guides. We had 11 clients, 12 high altitude Sherpas. And the clients, again, were all legitimate clients. They had climbing resumes. They had been in the mountains before. They'd been at altitude. Each of the 4 of us guides knew each of the clients had been with us on some climb before, so we could vouch for their suitability to be on Everest, which I don't believe is happening all the time these days. But back then, we were pretty careful about who we were taking because it was still a very new thing, and Everest still had the mystique of prior years, where holy cow, to climb Everest was the most notable achievement you could ever have in your life, and which I think it's been watered down quite a bit these days. But back then, it was still an awesome undertaking, very unsure whether we would get to the top, whether we would even survive. Where now, from a distance, I haven't been back in quite a while, but it seems like people go there with the expectation that they will climb to the top and that they will survive, and then they'll come back home and go about their business. Back then, we had the feeling like, oh my God, what are we in for here? Are we sure we're ready for this? This was a really big undertaking, and we took it very seriously. Not to say that it isn't taken seriously these days. I'm sure it is, because it's still a dangerous place to be. But back in those days, I think there was more awe and perhaps more respect for the mountain than I'm seeing these days.
I can agree with that. And back then too, it was a matter of you still needed to climb up there on your own power. But now it seems like if you have the money and the funds, someone can literally drag you to the top. You're not carrying any of your gear. All you have, your whole job is just to walk and
walk and breathe. Yeah, walk and
pretty
breathe.
Much.
Right.
Walk and breathe.
In 89, we did have regular bottled oxygen. We had the French tanks that were state of the art back then, which we used at least once to a comical extent, which I'll tell you if we have time. But in 92, we began using 1 liter a minute to sleep on at the South Col, and then we climbed at 2 liters a minute from the col back to the col, and then on down from there. Breathing oxygen on Everest certainly isn't the same as going up without oxygen, but I think most people understand that for safety reasons, it's best for most people to breathe oxygen. Now, from what I understand, you can buy oxygen and start breathing it from Camp 2 at whatever, 21,000 feet, and have only a bottle of oxygen on your back all the way up and all the way down again. So yes, you're climbing the mountain, but no, what you're really doing is bringing the mountain down to your size rather than climbing up to the actual top of the mountain in its own right.
And during your era, did they have a rope fixing team? Because nowadays, every year there's a little team that goes up, they fix the ropes all the way to the top. But I believe when you climbed on, let's see, what was it, in 92 from Nepal, they didn't have that.
That's correct. Mostly. There was a team, the Khumbu doctors were just beginning then. But each team, and I guess there were 8 other expeditions on the mountain that year. Each team sent up a couple of Sherpas ahead of time and figured out the route through the icefall and put the ladders in and fixed the ropes. Then, as now, the ice fall is very active, and the route changes because of avalanches and seracs moving and all. So we would each, as need be, we would go back up when our turn came and refix the route. There wasn't a set team of Sherpas like there are now, whose only job was to fix and repair the ice fall. We each of the expeditions, to the best of our abilities, would send Sherpas and sometimes guides up to refix the route. So we did have that established in 92. Beyond the top of the ice fall, up to Camp 1, up to the base of the Lhotse face, you were on your own. You walked across and there became a beaten track, but the first few of us who went up were picking our own way through the crevasses, and there were a couple of yawning crevasses that needed ladders placed horizontally across them, which was an awesome experience. There was a single, probably a 7mm nylon rope anchored at the foot of the Lhotse face that went up to Camp 3 and then continued up the Lhotse face and over to South Col. So we did have a fixed rope in there, but it was just a very minimal thing. And we kind of viewed it more as just kind of route finding rather than safety. Following the rope meant you were on the route. We attached to it, of course, with our ascender, but we didn't really want to test it by falling on it because it was such a flimsy little rope. Above the South Col, again, no ropes until we got to the base of the South Summit, which all of a sudden turns quite steep, and there was a crevasse there and some really broken, soft, unconsolidated snow. And there was a fixed rope for about 100 feet up to the South Summit. And then from the summit over to the foot of the Hillary step, no rope. That really steep, awesome corniced ridge that you've seen where people traverse across heading toward the step, no rope. We were roped together. There were, the day we summited, there were 3 of us, Vern and me and one client. And Vern and I were taking turns leading each pitch. It seems to me Vern led across that pitch, and then I led up the Hillary step on the ropes. There were fixed ropes there. In fact, there were too many fixed ropes. There were several that were dangling. Some were frozen into old snow. We ended up actually hooking up to 2 different ropes with both of our ascenders in case one broke on a fall, the other hopefully would hold us. And then we got to the top of the step and walked to the summit, no fixed rope. So there were 2 main fixed ropes between the col and the top in those days. I understand now that the entire route is fixed. And I would say probably as it should be these days, because there are so many people, you'd have people wandering all around up there without knowing exactly where the route is. So that's probably a good thing now, considering all the climbers. One really scary thing that happened while we were going up, it was up above the balcony, heading up toward the South Summit. Somebody up above, Rob Hall's team was up above us. They were the ones who got out first that morning, and they were, 100 or 200 feet above us the whole way. One of their team dropped his oxygen bottle. And fortunately, the slope had been angling, so they were further over to the right above us. And that bottle came rocketing down like a torpedo. And it was maybe 50 feet away from us as it went down at terminal velocity. And that would have gone right through somebody if you'd been in the way. That was such a funny thing to see at first. And then we're going, holy shit. that could have been bad. So hopefully nobody drops an oxygen bottle with 200 people below them these days.
There have been a couple of missteps that I've heard from. Usually it's rocks. Someone had mentioned to me that they almost got kicked in the face with crampons because they were so, I think it
Yeah,
was
so
on the
close.
Hillary step.
Sure, I can believe that.
Um,
That's always scary to be climbing beneath somebody with crampons because you're looking right up at them, and one little slip and it's right in your face.
but other than that, I think you've just got the regular risks that are up there, the avalanches, the slip and fall, the crevasse, all of those things. Just and of course, the altitude sickness, which is always a risk.
And
Um,
the weather. And the weather.
and the weather. And the weather's a big thing. If this year, from what I've heard and what I've looked up and researched, it was the coldest year in I don't even know how long. I've heard it was the coldest ever, but there's really nothing to
Really? This
back
year?
that. Yeah.
Huh.
Negative 45,
Ooh,
43,
ooh,
depending on who you
ooh,
talk to.
ooh. Was that the wind chill? That's counting wind chill. It must be.
Yes. And so there was a lot of frostbite, more than normal, about double what it normally is. And also, well, there was a lot of altitude related stuff, which could be inexperienced climbers and people who aren't acclimatized. But the cold was a huge thing, and people got stuck
Oh,
at Camp 4 way too long.
oh, and then getting stuck up on the mountain behind in a line of rope. But that sounds so bad. Yeah.
I heard it was very miserable and very hard. And out of the 4 people that I've talked to that went up this year, 2 of them had pretty severe frostbite.
Sure. And they lost digits.
It was undetermined as of yet. One of them, her name is Gabby. She is a physician out in Australia. She said that they felt that she probably won't lose anything, but it's a really long recovery. They're still working on it, so they don't know
It's
yet.
painful too. It's painful. I've had frostbite. It hurts when it's recovering.
Well, Montana got almost that cold in this last winter.
Yeah, I know. We live with that, but we can go indoors here. I just put another log in the fire and sit close.
Yeah. But the other guy and he is a piano player. And so he may be losing 1 or 2 appendages. He doesn't know yet. And he's from Israel. And so they don't have the experience with frostbite that maybe some, like a hospital in Colorado, might have, because Israel's in the desert.
Right.
So it's still to be determined.
Well, YouTube has some great videos on treating frostbite. I'm sure the doctors know that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's just different, because it's not something that Israeli doctors deal with. I mean, there's one small mountain in Israel. I think it's 2,500 meters, maybe, or is that feet? I mean, it's lower than what we have. So it's pretty low. Um, what do you think the main differences are between guiding then and guiding now?
First thing that comes to mind is they're probably making a lot more money than I made, as they should. It's a dangerous thing to do, and huge amount of responsibility, uh, enormous amount of skill required and experience required to do that effectively. So the guys and the women who are guiding now, I hope, have done their homework and done their background to be there. I do believe, and I'm just speaking in general terms, I'm sure there are people who are guiding there now who should not be guiding. I think it's become such a cottage industry, guiding Everest, that you can hang out your shingle and say, I'm a mountain guide, I'll take you up Everest. And if you talk a good story and have a good website, people will believe you and follow you up, whether you know what you're doing or not. And it does seem like there are some up there who perhaps are fine mountain climbers, but there's a lot more to it than just being a good mountain climber. To be a good guide, you've got to be able to not only take care of yourself, and not only take care of your clients, but be able to anticipate the problems that the clients are going to have. And that's a real skill that doesn't come easily or naturally or quickly. It takes, I think, a lot of time in the mountains with clients to be able to see them and to read them, to understand what's going on, to understand the conditions that you're in and the condition they're in, to know what they need. So I think some of the trouble that's going on Everest these days is the fact that the people guiding them shouldn't be guiding them. They should not be where they are. And that's, you might also add to that the quality of the clients themselves, because if they haven't had much experience in high altitude or in the mountains in general, they may be more prone to hire a less expensive guide who offers a good deal. And there you go, you've got two inexperienced people climbing this big hairy mountain, and danger lurks when that goes on.
That seems to be the consensus, is that it's really coming down to the guides and the experience that they have, and that seems to be considered the main reason of why there have been so many deaths in the last couple of years, excluding natural causes. It's because the guides, A, are not experienced like they should be, but also they're not responsible.
Right. And they don't, I get the impression they don't feel the responsibility. I get the feeling, and again, it's all, I haven't been there to know, but I do read whatever I can whenever the Everest season is going on. It seems like they feel, these guides feel that since they're a strong mountain climber, then that's all it takes. And they're not really paying attention to the details that I have just mentioned about reading their clients, and reading the conditions and reading the weather in relation to their clients, not just in relation to themselves. Often, these are Sherpas who are now guiding. These are Westerners, foreigners who are mountain guides elsewhere or climbers elsewhere. They know what they can do with the weather that's happening right now, or with the weather that maybe is coming in. They may not be able to know how that weather or these snow conditions will affect the client. And I think that's the essence of guiding, is not so much being a strong climber, but being a guide where you can take care of your client. Your responsibility 100% is to that client. It's not to yourself, only in as much as you got to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of the client. But that's a given. If you can't take care of yourself, you don't belong there. But to read the client, to know his abilities, his or her abilities, in relation to existing conditions and incoming conditions, that's the essence. I think often these clients, or the guides, are so bent on reaching the summit, they take chances they shouldn't take. And this goes beyond just novice guides, because after all, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher died up there, and you wouldn't find more experienced, more capable, more caring guides than Rob Hall and Scott. But they made a couple of bad decisions, and they died. Huge loss to the climbing community, to the guiding community. But there you go. That's a morality tale right there, that even the best do make bad decisions. So given that, if you're not the best, you are more prone to making bad decisions than otherwise. So, oh my gosh, go with a qualified guide if you're going to go. Pay the money and save your life, or at least save your fingers and your toes.
Right. And I was talking to Adrian Bollinger from Alpenglow, and he was saying that even an injury to him is not a successful trip, that when it comes to his clients, that if they do develop frostbite and not even a death, just frostbite, to him it is not a successful trip, and he did not do what he was supposed to do as a guide for those clients. That you really have to be responsible, know what you're doing, and take care of that person, because that's what you're paid to do, and not risk yourself or them, but them, because they are the client.
Totally true. I agree with that all the way. I've been on climbs where we've summited, but somebody got hurt, and it's not a good feeling, even reaching some remote, distant, very expensive summit. If somebody gets hurt along the way, somehow it boils down to being the guide's fault. It shouldn't happen. Even if he's not there, he should have anticipated whatever goes on. Even if if he has no direct responsibility, the responsible guide, is going to feel bad about the climb, to look at it in the memory and realize that that was not one of my best efforts.
And you have a lot of experience guiding, Skip. In fact, you were the first person, and tell me if I'm wrong, that guided to all of the 7 summits. Is that correct? The very first one?
Yep, that's correct. With that Everest summit in '92, that was my 7th summit. And in '85 or '86, when Dick Bass's book came out, The 7 Summits, most of us in the climbing community hadn't even thought of the concept yet. It hadn't occurred to us to climb the highest peak on all the 7 continents, but it created such a stir in the mountain community that we were all talking about it. Wow, what a thing, what a thing. Well, by that time, I had already guided 2 or 3 of the continental high points. So in my own mind, I thought, things are opening up out there in the mountains of the world. Karsten's Pyramid was now being accessible. Everest was becoming more accessible to more people. I'm going to try to be the first to guide the 7 summits. That was my goal. And I did it.
If you were to climb Mount Everest again, which side would you pick, the north side or the south?
I'd probably choose a helicopter. Well, if I went back, this is totally theoretical, of course, at this point in my life, but I'd go back to the north side, to the Tibetan side. That when I was up there on that north ridge, it was so intriguing looking up at especially at the second step and then the top, and that the history of that route from all the early British expeditions. I think that's where I would go. There are fewer people on the route as well, which is an attraction. It's in China, which is a detraction, but still the history of that route and the appeal of the route itself would bring me back to the north side.
That's interesting. I don't think anyone's mentioned that so far as a reason to go back to the north, more of like it's safer because it's better regulated. So that's interesting. Do you have any anecdotes or stories about being at base camp in '92, or some of the climbers that you climbed with during that time?
Right. One sad anecdote. I was on a climbing expedition to the Indian Karakoram, to a peak called Remo in 1986. It was 24,000 foot peak. It hadn't been climbed before. It was an Australian, New Zealand expedition. I was the only American on the trip. Peter Hillary was the leader of that trip. And we had a really cool expedition. We didn't reach the top, but we got close, and we all came back alive and in one piece. And among the people on that trip was an Indian climber whose name was Magan Bisa, who was almost like Queequeg in Moby Dick. He had the mystical marbles in his hand, and he was chanting quite a bit. And a very interesting man. I really liked him. He and I shared a tent for a while on that trip. He happened to be on an Indian expedition climbing Everest in 92, base camp not too far from ours. And I would go over and hang out with Magan Bisa sometimes when I was in base camp. And I was over there one afternoon having a cup of tea, and all the Indians that were there were having a good time drinking tea and laughing. And they had a team up on the mountain that had been up there for a few days, which they hadn't heard from for a couple of days. And while I was there in that camp, a radio call came in from up above from another team radioing down to the Indians that their 2 members were found dead, that they had made an attempt to go from Camp 3 up to the South Col, and they hadn't made it. And they got apparently benighted, lost their way, and froze to death. And all of a sudden, this Indian camp went from happy times to the most morbid, sad group of people I have ever been around. You can imagine. Their 2 friends who they had high hopes for were now dead, and not just dead, but way up high and dead. That was a real reality check for me and for everybody there when that came down, because I just pointed out that this is nothing to mess around with. There's no, that ego involvement is the wrong kind of involvement on this climb. And that's pretty much, I think, what it came down to in that case. I've stayed in touch with Magan Bisa, not so much lately, but for a while after that. And he, because of that experience, he quit climbing. And he was a strong climber. He was one of the better Indian climbers of the day. But he quit climbing, and he said that was enough for him. He had too many responsibilities at home to risk it. I think if those 2 men had not died, Magan Bisa would have continued climbing and probably would have gotten to the top of Everest ultimately, but that was too much for him. I've never forgotten that. That's, we in base camps, we often take things sort of lightly because we're all here having fun. And sometimes there's parties going on and people coming to visit and new friends being made and talking about the route and all the stuff and other climbs we've done. But then all of a sudden you've got to remember, oh my God, this is a big mountain up there and it does not care much about you. And we really need to be paying attention, and not just paying attention part of the time, but really paying attention all the time.
One of the themes when I talk to the mountaineers, especially those who are still out there, climbing every year, they're on multiple expeditions, is the mortality. It's a common theme that we talk about, and about how likely it is that I may talk to them now, and in 3 years from now, they're gone. And this year was a wake-up call for so many people, because Noel Hana, his death impacted many people in the climbing community. It definitely made a lot of people wake up to that. And since the 90s, when you were guiding, what do you do now?
Oh, I'm still guiding. I'm still guiding.
Well, where do you guide?
This is my 50th year of mountain guiding right now. I was down in Colombia earlier this year, climbing, guiding. I'm not going up. Well, I went up to Cho-Oyu a few years later after 92. In 96, I climbed Cho-Oyu, summited on my 49th birthday, which I was proud of. Ed Viesters and I were guiding that one. In fact, that was supposed to be Rob Hall and me guiding Cho-Oyu that year. That was the year Rob died. He died in the spring. He had a group, I had a group. We were going together to guide Cho-Oyu. Rob died. Ed Viesters took over the trip, and so that trip together. But after climbing Cho-Oyu, and I didn't use oxygen that time, I summited with one client and without oxygen, but it was, I got a feel for what it's like to be at 8,000 meters without oxygen, and it's rough. It's hard going. I got to the summit. The beauty of Cho-Oyu from the normal route is you cannot see Everest or the Khumbu until you stand on the very summit of Cho-Oyu. You can't see it until you're actually on the top. 10 feet short of the summit, you can't see it. On the top, you get this fantastic layout of Everest and Nuptse and Lhotse and Pumori and everything else out there. It's spectacular. I got to the top of Cho-Oyu and I looked out there and I went, whew, and laid down on my back and breathed for about 5 minutes. It was all I could do. Finally, I got up and we took pictures and everything was fine. We got down okay. But after that experience, I told myself, enough of the 8,000 meters. I think I'll keep it to 7,000 meters now. So for a number of years, I went back to Aconcagua and some other close to 7,000 meter peaks until all of a sudden I figured I should probably not go to 7,000 meters anymore. So now 6,000 is good enough for me. I go up to Kilimanjaro almost every year. That's a nice 6,000 meter peak. Nice, not too hard. I've done it a lot. But now in Colombia, there are beautiful peaks that are 15, 16, 17,000 feet. Nice climbs in beautiful country with very few other people trekking and climbing out there. It's fun. I've been to Colombia 5 times in the last several years guiding mountains. I've been to Bolivia guiding in Ecuador, quite a bit in Ecuador. So there's no reason to stop climbing, stop guiding. But along the way, because of, I can't keep it up at the pace I used to. I'd be on guiding high mountains 6 or 7 times a year, going from one to another, and life was great. I was having fun, making money, coming home to my wonderful wife and family, and going off again. And she'd come with me part of the time, and then I go off. But gradually, my body just won't let me do that anymore, as much as I'd love to. It just won't put up with it. So now along the way, I've also become a pretty good safari guide. I've always been a bird watcher, and now I take people on wildlife safaris, walking safaris in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Botswana, specializing in birding, but not only, but wildlife safaris. I've been touring a boat in the Galapagos, a 72-foot catamaran, sailing catamaran, and I'll take 10 clients, and my wife comes along, and my daughter came once, and we go sailing through the Galapagos for a couple of weeks, just looking at wildlife and scuba diving. And this is the kind of guiding I'm doing now. I run all different kinds of trips. I do have at least 1 climb every year, sometimes 2. And that's good. That's about right for me. And then I'll go off and do these less physically demanding, but in a way more intellectually demanding trips. Not to say that mountain guiding isn't intellectual, which it certainly is, but there's the physical component of mountain guiding is certainly the major part of it. The intellectual part is anticipating the weather and knowing the technical aspects of climbing and all. But wildlife guiding is totally different. You have to really want to know the life cycles of all the animals and the ages and reproductive methods and markings and everything. It's really fun. It's really challenging, and it keeps my brain young. And many of my old climbing clients also obviously have gotten older and can't or don't want to climb anymore. So now they're bringing their wives and their kids and sometimes their grandkids on trips with me, and we're going off on these really fun trips to different parts of the world. So that keeps me going. I have no need and no reason and no desire to retire yet, because I'm having too much fun doing what I've always done.
And where can we find your upcoming trips that you have scheduled? What's your
Well, you can
website,
go
Skip?
to skiphorner.com, www. Or email me, skip@skiphorner.com, and I'm right here. I'll talk you up.
And I guess circling back, because usually I end it with where can we find you? You knew you knew Rob Hall and Scott Fisher.
Mhm.
And there aren't very many people alive now that still know them, because again, mountaineering, there's not a long life expectancy, really. What would you say about them?
Well, I knew Rob pretty well. I only knew Scott in passing. We'd met each other here and there. I never worked with Scott. I just knew him for his humor and his skill and his charisma. He was a charismatic guy. Holy cow. Everybody loved Scott. Well, almost everybody loved Scott. But Rob and I ran a Karstens Pyramid trip together, the same way we were about to do Cho-Oyu. I had climbed Karstens once before. That was how I managed to become the first to guide the 7 summits by this earlier Karstens trip, which was kind of a severe climb. I had 2 clients, and we were from base camp to the summit back to base camp was a 24-hour ascent, descent through the rain and the fog, and it was a real epic. But we made it. Rob had gone to Carstens the following year and couldn't find the route, and because it's not obvious, it really is not an obvious way up. So he didn't make the top. So we met in Antarctica. We happened to climb Vinson together, and so we became friends from there. And he had access, or he knew how to get access to a helicopter in New Guinea, where I knew the route. So we combined our forces. He had 6 or 7 clients, and I had 5 or 6 clients, and we pooled resources, hired the helicopter that he knew about that got us over all the boggy, low country, wet, sloppy, muddy, swampy stuff, and set us down 2 days lower than the mountain. And then we hiked up, acclimatizing to the base of Carstens, and we hired 2 assistant guides to come with us. And so the first day, Rob and the 2 assistants took his people to the top. Well, no, take it back. The first day, the 2 assistants and Rob and I, the 4 of us, climbed the mountain, fixed ropes on some of the key pitches, had a great time. It was fun. Great day. 4 guides out in the mountains in the sun. It was beautiful. Came down. The next day, Rob and those two guys took Rob's clients up and then came back down. And then the third day, again, the 2 assisting guides and I took my clients to the top and came down. So we had a very successful trip. Really fun people, had a great trip. Rob and I bonded really well. His wife Jan was on the trip too, and I got to like her quite a bit, and knew her from before as well. So I had a pretty good feeling for Rob, and Rob was also a charismatic guy. You know, New Zealanders are sort of born with charisma, it seems. They just have that accent and that suaveness and that combination of couldn't care less and couldn't care more attitude. It's something unique about New Zealanders, about Kiwis. And Rob had it in spades. He was just the coolest guy, fun to talk to, generous, open, great listener, solid climber, wonderful man. You know, I could see Rob was going to be a buddy of mine for the rest of my life. And then when he died, you know, I was just, you know, I was trashed. It was terrible. It was just terrible.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I know that it's really hard to talk about those moments, those in the mountaineering community that are no longer with us.
You know, I take exception a little bit to that, because it's important to talk about these people who died and to talk about how they died, because that's how we learn not to die. And you talk about it, you publish these stories, people read it, and it helps them hopefully not die when the time comes. And I think it's important to talk about them too, even to talk about how they died or that they died, and because that helps keep their memory alive, because they deserve to have their memory kept alive. Rob especially, wow, what a guy. Scott too, although like I said, I didn't know Scott that well, but charismatic, wonderful, generous people who died, and they died tragically, and you could say unnecessarily, although doing what they were doing, like you say, life expectancy of a guide is not as long as an accountant. So you might have expected that to happen. I have a little bulletin board downstairs by my storeroom where I have photographs of all my friends who have died. And, you know, there's quite a few photographs on that billboard right now, on that chalkboard. But Rob is right in the middle. Rob, a big picture of Rob and me on Carstens, and we were a big smile on his face, you know. And every time I go into my storeroom, I look at that board and think, all right, there's Rob, and there, you know, these other people who I've known in my life too, who some who have died naturally and at older ages, and some who have died tragically at young ages. Shame to think that these people were so wonderful, so energetic and bright and charismatic. Had they lived another 20 or 30 years as I have, and I've had this great life. I mean, every day, every year of my life has been so cool. And theirs would have been too if they had just made it through that particular day when they died. If they had just gotten down off the mountain that day, they could still be alive now, enjoying all this cool stuff that we still have around us that we can still do. It's important to keep their memories alive and to think about them and to actively think about not dying when situations arrive where you might die. Think about staying alive. It's the best thing.
I don't think I've thought of it that way before. I mean, I know we talk about those that have died, and that happens quite frequently on this podcast. But I don't think we've ever really talked about, the lessons learned from those tragedies. And so I think I'm going to be more mindful of that moving forward. And thank you so much for sharing that with us, Skip. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome.
And
Good. It's
thank
good
you
to
so
talk
much.
about it. You're welcome. This has been
Thank
fun. I've enjoyed talking with you.
um thank you so much for doing this with me. I definitely appreciate it, and hopefully we'll hear more from you in the future.
All right. You know where I live.
And that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed interviewing Skip. There's not a lot of mountaineers left from his generation, and his story and the story of those in the mountaineering community that are still alive from that era are very important. Speaking of which, I have another interview scheduled for next week for the podcast. I'm not going to say who it is, but he is from Skip's generation, and he has a lot of experience as a guide, as a business owner. I've never interviewed anyone from his country before. And if I say much more than that, you might guess who it is. But I reached out to him a couple days ago and he said, absolutely, let's do the interview. And I really hope that it happens. Fingers crossed. Until next time, climb your own climb. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the All About Everest podcast. We would love it if you would rate, subscribe, and follow wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us on social media at All About Everest Podcast or at Mama Bear Outdoors. You can support our podcast by subscribing to our Patreon or by buying us a coffee. Until next time.